tīmata tēnei kōrero I te karakia, mīnui tātou. He mua koe ia mātou I hoa hei tohu ia mātou mahi katoa, ko koe anō hoki e whakakaha ia mātou kia whai gloria e hoki o mātou mahi katoa. He mea tīmata, he mea mahi, he mea whakaoti roto I a koe, ki whiwhai hoki mātou I te oranga tonu tangata mea atu whaitia nei e koe, koe hikrai te koe tō mātou wariki. Āmini.
Āmini.
Kia ora.
Dave. Tēnā tātou, nei rā te mihi atu ki a koutou katoa, ko Nesus tōku ingoa, he uri o Poraurangi. Thank you all for joining us tonight in the UK and tomorrow morning in New Zealand for our Treaty of Waitangi panel discussion. I just wanted to do a really brief introduction around the genesis for tonight's panel. Usually in the UK, Waitangi Day itself is celebrated with a range of activities and events. And this year we are in a national lockdown. We are in our third national lockdown. So it gave time to think about actually what we could be doing instead. And it seemed pretty kind of common sense to actually talk about the Treaty of Waitangi. And I'm particularly interested in understanding what it is to be Māori in the UK and the significance of the treaty to Māori that have lived or live in the UK. So I'm going to hand it over to my tuakana Catherine in a moment, but housekeeping, if you're an attendee, you should start seeing just a grid of the four panelists. This allows them to start engaging and you won't be able to interrupt the flow of conversation. There's a question and answer function. Please put any questions you have. When the session is closing to near the end of 10 minutes, I'll pop up again and then I'll start asking them questions. Also, there's a chat function. Please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and just a reminder that this is a safe space, that you know, please be respectful in that chat, but we would really be keen to know where you guys are from. Catherine, over to you.
Kia ora tātou, tēnā te mihi atu kia koutou, nau mai, hara mai. Ki ngā kai kōrero o te wā, ngā mihi kia koutou. Kia koutou e hui hui mai nei, mō tēnei kōrero hara mai. Ko Catherine Nesus tōku ingoa, he uri o Poraurangi, kei te noho au ki rārana I naina engari tipu ai ki te awa kairangi me te whanganui a tara. It's with great delight that I open our discussion tonight. We're really pleased to have three fabulous speakers who bring their expertise and lived experience to the panel today. Roimata, Joe and David will introduce themselves shortly. Each of our panellists live or have lived in the UK and maintain deep, deep connections to their Tūranga waiwai. Hopefully at the end of our session today, you'll have a broader understanding of Te Tiriti and its impact across the oceans. So being able to have a conversation about Te Tiriti, its meaning and how it influences our lives is an incredible privilege and one we didn't always have. As Māori, we don't have a monolithic view, so it's great we're going to hear from three great speakers tonight. And additionally, as Māori, we don't get the choice about whether we are political or not. And so our very being, our points of view and our choices are in themselves political. So having a voice and an opinion about Te Tiriti is part of us telling and owning our own narrative about deciding how we want to be seen and heard. So with that, I hand over to our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll kick into the questions. Joe, we'll start with you.
Oh, kia ora tātou, ko Joe Walsh tōku ingoa. I have the utmost privilege and pleasure of living really close to Waitangi. I'm currently residing in Paihia. Originally from Kaikohe, I grew up in Masterton and have connections both to Ngapuhi and to Ngāti Porou. From the Treaty of Waitangi perspective, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, many of my whanaunga were and signed the Te Tiriti o Waitangi at Waitangi, including my great-great-great-grandmother Te Wai Clark, who was there with her parents. So I am an arts producer, or was an arts producer in the UK. for the last 10 years, and a lot of the work that I did decolonising and working with institutions like the British Library and the National Maritime Museum, I use principles of Te Tiriti or Waitangi to help close the gap between the many parties of Te Moana Nui a Kiwa and those institutions in the UK.
Fabulous. Thank you, Joe. David.
I'll just unmute my audio. Kia ora tātou. I tētahi taha ko puketapu te maunga ko te ara e te awa korongo whakaata te iwi. I tētahi atu taha ko maunga haruru te maunga ko waikari te awa ko ngai te ruruku te hapu ko Ngāti Kahungunu te iwi. Those are two of my iwi, but yep, so for me, I'm living here in Tūranga Nui a Kiwa in Gisborne, grew up here with all my kuia and koroua and all my cousins. But I suppose for me, Tūranga Nui a Kiwa was the first place of contact between Cook and my iwi of Rongo Whakaata. And so our story starts at first contact, and the ripples of that first contact continue and continued past and through the Treaty of Waitangi. So we are always talking about Te Tiriti in one way or another. And you're right, Catherine, you know, Māori are political. It doesn't matter. We are political people. It's in everything we do and who we are. And I think about the words iho mā kōrero. And for me, it's likened to our hair. You know, in our hair, we carry the genes, our own genes, and we carry our experiences through that. Mā, enlightenment or experiences, kawe, to carry, and rau, being in the hundreds or many. So, you know, just us living here, breathing, we carry the experiences of our tipuna in our DNA. So, e mihi ana kia koe o tira te whānau. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Thank you, David. Roimata.
Kia ora tātou, ko hikurangi te maunga, ko waipu te awa ko Ngāti Porou te iwi. Ko Roimata Claasen tōku ingoa. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou, kia koe Catherine, kia kōrua hoki David, rāua ko Joe, kia koe hoki Claire, ko tō kanohi. Kei rānana ahawi nainei, kei Oxford, ki te whariwananga e aku ana, and he honoro nui ki te hono atu ki tēnei kōrero. Just turning to English. I'm currently in London. Well, I'm not really, I'm in Oxford, but it's close enough. And lockdown number 3, and it's horrible. And I'm very jealous of everyone joining from. So my background is in the law. I've been a lawyer for the last, like 10. And I have a lot of reasons to be a part of this panel tonight.
Ka pai. Thanks, Roimata. Your internet's breaking up a bit. Good old English internet. We'll soldier on. So thank you all for your introductions, and hopefully our audience can see why you're all here, and the whakapapa you bring to the tepu and to this kōrero. We'll start with David. What does the Treaty of Waitangi mean to you? Well, you know, a nice easy one to start with.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I don't know if that is an easy question, but for me, I think it comes back to a relationship between peoples. So when people ask me about, you know, the atrocities that happened with the Treaty of Waitangi, for me, I look at it like this. It's a relationship between people. The treaty was an agreement to work together, to be together, to live together, one way or another. But when the power shifted, the rules changed, and we were pretty much left out on the side. I liken it to I put it in a story like this. Imagine someone's come and talked to you first, said, look, we want to come and stay here. And you say, yep, look, come stay over there. You can do this, you can do that. I'll do what I need to do on this side. But as time progressed, more people turned up, and then all of a sudden they turn up to your house. They beat your family. They kill some of your aunties, your uncles, maybe your nanny. They rape your sister. They do all of these horrible things. and then they kick you out of your own house. And at that point, you're sitting there going, hey, I've just been kicked out of my house. It's war pretty much. You need to come in and sort something out. But at the same time, what then happens is they go and talk to their friends who are in the newspapers, and they say, look, let's start saying all of these horrible things about the people we just kicked out of their house. And you put this on those people and you say, they are nasty people. They are people that shouldn't be doing all of these things. And all of a sudden, you are tarnished with this brush. You carry this mamai of what's happened to your family. You have children, you then have grandchildren. You may not tell those stories to them, but they can feel it. And then they understand, and then they hear these stories about what's happened to you as a person. And so you may pass away, but then your children carry that pain. And until that pain is addressed, that pain is continued and carried on through our own genes. And people talk about, and I'm going to talk about Holocaust, but people talk about people in the Holocaust that, scientifically, it's carried through those genes for so many generations. Now, for us, we carry it through our kōrero, we carry it through our whakapapa, we carry these relationships. And I was talking while I was doing some work on the Treaty of Waitangi. I was a lawyer as well, as Roimata. And I remember Patu Hohepa from up north giving evidence in the Waitangi tribunal about the relationship of Te Tiriti or Waitangi. And he likened it in terms of whakapapa. And so the relationship where we talk about whakapapa is, whakapapa means to place one flat surface upon another. That's its literal meaning, but it also means genealogy. And when we think about whakapapa in that perspective, we're actually talking about relationships between people. And those relationships continue from generation to generation to generation. And what he spoke about was our ancestors already had relationships with the kings and queens before the Treaty of Waitangi. And so when the Treaty of Waitangi was signed, all they were doing was continuing the relationships that had already been made earlier between ngā tino rangatira. And so this is the kōrero I've read and seen and heard. And so for me, when we think about this, you take this one story on one side and you take the relationship and whakapapa on the other, and actually it's just a continuation of those relationships. So the relationships go from good to bad to worse. And then as every generation continues, there's parts good, parts bad, and parts not good at all. So for me, we live and breathe the treaty relationship one way or another. We continue this through our interactions, not only with each other, but as whānau, as hapu, as iwi, and in our relationships with government, with the Crown, with government agencies, and even with corporates. So it's a bit of a long one, a long way to talk about it. But, if we don't address the issues in treaty and these treaty issues, then that mamai continues. And I suppose it's not for others to fix the mamai, it's for us to fix our own mamai, but creating relationships and pathways where we can actually work together begins that relationship and begins mending that relationship that was broken all those many, many moons ago.
Kia ora, David. That's a lovely, challenging way to open up today. But that whole thread of whakapapa throughout and the mamai we carry through those generations, whether we realise it or not, actually, and the stories we hear from our external environment. When we have broadcasters making racist statements about us. It's not something in the past, it's something today that we all live with. Roimata, over to you.
Kia ora. If my internet plays up again, I might have to turn off the camera, which is a real shame for everyone watching, but kei te pai. So what does a treaty mean to me? I think, look, I'm going to turn my camera off because I'm getting an unstable thing. Just look at my picture in Z. So the treaty to me is the most important document in our history, and it was supposed to lay the foundation for a nation where Māori would exercise rangatiratanga as they always have over their lands and their taonga. Unfortunately, that's not what happened, and that's going right back to the fact that we actually have two documents. So we have the treaty, which is what the Crown relies on, and that's where it says quite clearly that Māori cede sovereignty. And then we have Te Tiriti, which is completely different and reserves to rangatira their rangatiratanga. And so the thing we really honed in on at my kura was, what is the difference between kāwanatanga, which is mentioned in the Māori text, and sovereignty, and where does tino rangatiratanga fit into that? And in my mind, it's not even a real question, it's quite obvious. So Māori in those days, I mean, we're not even going that far back, right? We're going 1840. In the context of the world, that's not that long ago. Those who were privileged to be able to speak English learned to speak that language from ngā mihinare, right? From the missionaries, from the Bible. And the Bible used the word kāwanatanga to mean governing or governor, which was a lesser power than, which was of lesser mana to the rangatira who were reading that text. So they would have understood that kāwana is not the ultimate mana, right? That's the story of Ponotio Pilato or Pontius Pilate. So in my mind, it's like, how did this even happen? And there are lots of theories on how that happened. I actually think it was deception because of the way that as soon as it was signed, before the ink was even dry, the Crown was already breaching the terms. So in my mind, there was already bad faith there, but I mean, you can argue that until the cows come home. So for me, it's a really important document, and it would have been the basis of a nation where Māori would not be second-class citizens in their own land, would not be landless and alienated, would be connected to their whakapapa, where tikanga would be the basis of the civilization, because Māori did have tikanga as a form of law, not law, but law. But unfortunately, the Crown's actions completely undermined that, and we are where we are. So I think, circling back to the question, what does it mean to me? To me, it's lost potential, and that's very sad. And I think as a people, just to build on what David mentioned, the trauma that we carry is actually the trauma for that as well, for what could have been and what now will never be. Because let's be real, I mean, I know that there are some staunch advocates who are all for carving out a Māori nation, but I'm a pretty pragmatic person, and I understand that that will be very difficult. So now we have to make the best of a situation where we have a bicultural and moving into multicultural nation where Māori are at the bottom of the heap in almost every social indicator. So for us, the challenge now is, how do we make the best out of that situation?
Ka pai Roimata, thank you. It's a good challenge to have. And, you know, the whole phrase about lost potential, I think, is just so incredibly powerful, and certainly gives lots of food for thought. Joe, last but definitely not least, over to you.
So I think everything that David and Roimata said can lead to where I would like to begin, what I think Te Tiriti or Waitangi means to me, and that is that it is a partnership document from the perspective of an agent for change, that it contains principles that acknowledge the tangata whenua, our whakapapa, our mana, to support sustainability and growth. And then it's meant to present equality and as a thing of beauty and responsibility. So that for me, in my personal life and everything that I do, in the spaces that I exist in, it's about leading by example and using Te Tiriti or Waitangi as my base document to create the partnerships or the kōrero that I do in those spaces, and talking openly about what the outcomes of the Te Tiriti would be if we really, really engaged with them.
Good, Joe. Thank you. And I think, you know, that sort of fits really nicely with what David and Roimata are saying as well, and being able to be open and talking about it, I think, is really powerful. David and Roimata, or actually and Joe as well, is there anything further now that you've heard each other that you wanted to say or comment on in terms of, you know, the treaty and how we see it today?
I'll jump in. Roimata, you picked up on that lost potential aspect and totally agree on that. You know, it's a question of lost potential, but I also wonder where and how we make the treaty relationship fit today. There's still a lot of healing to go, and I think the healing sits with us, but also how do we build these relationships, not only with people, places here in Aotearoa, but also around the world, because you know, when our people talk about the relationship, they talk about te karauna. And while the government is, you know, acting for and on behalf of the Crown still is in the UK. And so all of us, well, I used to be in the UK for a short period. Joe, you lived there for a very long time. And Kath and Roimata, you're both still there, you know, so my question to all of us is, how do we build that relationship as Māori in the UK? Because in one sense, we've got Ngāti Rānana, who has been around for 60 plus years, you know, a beautiful kaupapa where we get to celebrate and share our culture. But how do we continue to build a treaty relationship, if that's what we want to call it, in the UK? You know, I was saying to some of my own whānau that, you know, there's an exhibition at home at the moment called Tū Te Whaihanga. And that was a lot of our taonga from First Contact being brought back here as part of the commemorations of Captain Cook's arrival. But I said, is there a way for us to then not only take that, but actually bring our people and tell a story, tell our own story, and bring that back and call that te hokinga, where we actually come back on the other side and bring those stories back and tell our story to the people, to Cook's people and to the people of the UK. Because through storytelling as a medium, that's one way in which we can start sharing and start exploring these type of relationships. And I'm sure, Joe, you'll be able to give us a bit more of an insight into how those relationships might work.
Storytelling's one of our strongest assets and resources, I think, particularly from a creative perspective. And in those spaces, we can really portray our history, particularly in a cultural and art space, so a creative space. So in my own experience, I find that when we're speaking one person to another, it's hard to be able to transfer all of your knowledge and all of your perspectives in order for someone else to understand. But if we use platforms such as storytelling, art, digital stuff, you have this space where no one can interrupt what you're saying, and then you can get your messages across in a really, really beautiful, poignant, straight way. And then the kōrero that you have behind it also supports what you're saying, but fills in all the gaps. So I just like to focus a little bit on the hoi that went back to Gisborne. That was a process. So that was like, I don't know, easily 10 years worth of negotiation when it should have been really incredibly simple. These hoi, which hold lots of genealogy and whakapapa for us, and also a lot of knowledge that can help install this really, really, really great matauranga and connect back to our people, so they start to have that like real relationship with the actual stories of the first encounter, where then they realize that they were in control of that relationship in the first meeting, and start to look at all of the interactions. That's where lots of the power in having these conversations lie. So the tonga in the museums, lots of it was appropriated, lots of it was taken by the missionaries. There are many, many stories about relationships and stuff. And what they tend to do in those institutions is focus on the object, not on the importance of the object, or that the object is actually our tipuna and connected to all of our stories and stuff. So, I mean, I could probably trying to squeeze it into a little space, but there is real power in our taonga and our taonga is there for a reason, and we need to reconnect with it in order to start telling those stories. So they've been there for a very long time, in some cases since, well, I don't know, early 1800s, inside those London Missionary Society collections, and now in all those institutions, they've been holding spaces for us so that we can go and tell those stories and start to shift that relationship. I think I'll just stop there because it is very, not complicated, but it is like, there are many things to consider. There's the relationship. We're very good at having relationships. This is what we've been taught in our tikanga, and we've always had that. All we need to do is activate that relationship, think about what we want to be saying, how we want to be saying it, and then start having those conversations with those people.
Yeah, I
kind of went.
No, I agree with what you said about it's that whole whakaaro about returning taonga and about giving them their space, like that's a really tricky one. But I just wanted to go back quickly to something you said earlier, Joe, when you were talking about what the treaty means to you, and you said partnership. I'm really interested in what partnership actually looks like in the context of the treaty, because I mean, we talk about, well, you know, there are passive partners and active partners, and the Crown needs to be active. But I also think it needs to be recognised that that's a concession on the part of Māori. So like I was saying before, Te Tiriti doesn't envision a partnership. It envisions you look after your people because they've come to our country and are causing havoc, and we will continue to live our life as we have done. And that's not what happens. So I think any idea of partnership needs to take into consideration that we are making a concession and accepting that. But anyway, that's kind of beside the point. David, you asked a really interesting question about how can Māori start building relationships with the Crown in the UK. And I have two whakaaro on that. The first one is, I know that some iwi are already doing that. And so shout out to Rongo Whakata, because they came here earlier, and it was like 2 years ago now. And we're doing exactly that, building relationships and having conversations with the British consulate in New Zealand, and then bringing those, transporting those relationships to the UK. So, and that's all about, as I understand it, although you're from Rongo Whakata, so you might want to like trump what I say, but my understanding is that's exactly what it's about. It's about recognizing that it was the Crown who signed the treaty with Māori, Arohomai, Te Tiriti with Māori, and so that's where the relationship should lie. That's my first whakaaro. My second whakaaro is, while I think that is very innovative and I can see the benefit of doing that, I also, part of me questions whether we actually want a relationship with a dusty old woman who lives in the UK. Like, our future is not, other than through maybe trade and as a way of facilitating the return of taonga, which you talked about, Joe, perhaps that is the benefit, and for that reason alone, forming a relationship with a dusty old woman in the UK is worth it. But other than that, I don't think our future lies in the past. I think we need to recognise where we are, build on it, and then continue to grow from there.
Yeah, I think you've picked up on something there, and I think it's the trade partnership. You know, we talk about trade, and we all have our tipuna who traded around not just New Zealand, but actually ventured out into the world and traded around all of the Pacific. So absolutely, I think there's a role in terms of trade. But for me, the next space for me, I see is information, is that space. And actually, you know, Apirana Ngata said it, you know, ko tō ringa ki te rākau a te Pākehā, hei tiki tiki mō tō mahunga. And so for me, my question also, I ask myself, what else can we get from this relationship? So if it's trade, absolutely, we can take from that space. The taonga space, absolutely. And I've just seen someone post up a message in the chat talking about hine mihi. And, you know, that's a big kaupapa happening in the UK at the moment. So ka mihi kia koutou e takahi ana I tērā huarahi, because through making those relationships and re-establishing those connections, we start building these relationships again. And actually, you're right, Roimata, it comes back to that question of what do we want to get out of this? If it is about trade, because we're now all moving into this bigger corporate spaces, iwi in the post-settlement space, you know, I've worked in post-settlement and worked in the settlement space, and you're absolutely right. Iwi have pretty much bent over backwards just about to get these settlements over the line. And this notion of partnership also sits in the space of, actually, if iwi are going to have to be at the table, then one of the biggest issues is they need to be resourced to do that, especially in the country, in Aotearoa. Because we talk about how we can get on and do it all by ourselves, but ultimately, if we have to go in and be the arbiters of not only tikanga, but all the environmental work, everything like that, which is part of our treaty settlements program, then we end up spending all the money that we've got dealing with all of that stuff instead of building our own people, which is what that notion of partnership was about, Roimata, which is what you were talking about, you know, our own people looking after our own. But in order to do that, there's a whole lot of, there's a much bigger complex web that sits in there at home. But when we leave home, that web still sits with us no matter where we go. And with technology the way it is, everyone usually knows what you're doing, where you're going, and I think there's definitely some of that continues when you're in the UK. I think there was just a bit of a roundabout way of saying, yeah, tautoko Roimata.
And I think what we've seen here is, you know, this really complicated conversation around power and control and trust and confidence. It was really, really interesting and really lots of food for thought, and sort of led straight into the next question, which you've already started to talk about as well, which is, you know, what does it mean to be Māori in the United Kingdom? You've already started to touch on this in different ways. Jo, why don't we start with you?
Hi. So the reason why I left Aotearoa in the first place was that I was feeling very disjointed. I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I didn't have any connection. I was spending a lot of time in a space where I was trying to be as Pākehā as possible, because being Māori wasn't getting me anywhere. And actually it was like quite a damaging relationship, and it was really, really affecting me physically, emotionally, and from a growth perspective. Luckily, my father is Scottish, I have a British passport, so I went to England. My first experience of being Māori in England was that I was an actual human being who was intelligent and could participate in spaces the way that I wanted to, and having my own voice. So I was able to get really amazing, interesting jobs straight out the gate, and then be able to navigate a space in which I learned more about my own identity, and then became more connected to my whakapapa back in Aotearoa. Inside many spaces in the UK, the respect and just acknowledgement was quite interesting. But then also it gave me time and space to figure out these very difficult questions, including Te Tiriti or Waitangi, why I was so connected to this document. And prior to leaving New Zealand, I had no idea that my whakapapa or my tipuna or any of those sort of really intense relationships existed. So inside the space of the UK, I was able to find those connections and then action them, and then start to do the work that I obviously have been meant to do all of my life. So I really appreciate the opportunities that the UK has given me. But then off the back of that, I did see lots of things occurring that really didn't sit well with me, because I am Ngapuhi and I was born an activist. So inside those political spaces where I could stand, I was like, hang on a minute, these guys, our people at home are talking about it, and this is really important to them. And here we are over here not actually participating in those conversations, even though we have got this position where we can facilitate those relationships. So that's my kōrero.
Ka whai, kia ora, Jo. Oof, that's a big challenge for us all, isn't it? Roimata.
Kia ora, Jo. So what does it mean to be Māori in the UK? I got asked this question about 6 months ago, and I said it was liberating. And I think it is, in the sense that for many Māori, when they come here, I say many, not all, you're white presenting. So you are in a privileged position that you're just not in New Zealand. And on top of that, you're from New Zealand, which, you know, we're the country that get to refer to ourselves as expats rather than immigrants. So we're privileged on top of privileged. And it is. So no one really understands what Māori is. They understand the haka. And so it is liberating, because you can walk into a room or introduce yourself and know that there's no baggage being attached to your name or your nose. Although I got my dad's little nose. But so, yeah, so I mean, I said it was liberating. My views changed in the last 6 months. So I've been in situations, and I've had conversations with my husband, Luke, about situations that he's been in, which has made me realize that the New Zealand community here is probably about 10 years in the past. And it's very difficult being a Māori and entering New Zealand spaces in the UK. Not all New Zealand spaces and not all New Zealand people here, but enough to make you remember, oh, actually, yeah, I'm just a little Māori girl. Do you know what I mean? And the insecurities that I think are present in all Māori who live in Aotearoa come rushing back. And so that has tempered my view and my rosy tinted glasses of what life is like here. But one example, it's actually not my story, it's my husband's story, but I'm going to share it because it was so ridiculous. So Ngāti Rānana, who we've been involved in, were asked to open a event for the New Zealand Society here. It was kind of like a fair, so different people selling different arts and crafts could come to New Zealand House and sell their products. I think it was around Christmas time. And so Ngāti Rānana, being Ngāti Rānana, said, yes, of course, we'll be there to tautoko your kaupapa for free. And my husband got up and did the whai kōrero. He did the whai kōrero in Māori because that's the tika way to do it. And then after his whai kōrero, when he was milling around, a Pākehā woman came up to him and said, you should have spoken in English so that we can understand what you're saying. It's rude to speak in Māori. And then she grabbed his taonga. And I just couldn't, when he told me that story, I couldn't believe it. But to me, that kind of āhua is actually quite common here. And the reason for that is these people need to go home. They need to go home and get a bit of a wake-up call about how things are progressing in New Zealand, because they will get a really big shock when they go home and realize that you can't say that to Māori anymore, because you have to recognize that tikanga and its expression has an inherent value, and we are entitled to express that. And if you have a problem with it, then your remedy is to learn Māori and get familiar and get comfortable. It's not our job to make you feel comfortable in our spaces. So, yeah, what's it like to be Māori in the UK? It's all right. I mean, I do agree with Joe. The professional opportunities are amazing, but the disconnection is real. And yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done in the New Zealand community in this country to make sure that they are keeping in step with how things are progressing at home.
Thank you, Roimata. I think you just described an experience many of us have had. Yeah, over to you, David.
Roimata, that experience you just spoke about reminds me of a story that just not long came out about Grey Power putting out a letter about one of the Bay of Plenty councillors getting up and doing a mihi as well. And they posted out this letter saying, you know, oh, it was quite rude of this person doing his mihi in Māori because none of us could understand it. You know, it blew itself up and then sorted itself out after it was referred to the Race Relations Commissioner. So, yep, we might be 10 years ahead, but there's still some of that who are happening at home. I took a couple of notes here. in terms of being Māori in the UK. For me, my experience hasn't been too long, but I think there's some of the things that I noticed was, in one sense, you do have this liberation because, you know, you're not tied to all of the kaupapa that you have with your own iwi being plural, because, you know, at the whānau hapu iwi level, you're expected to do all of these things. And so when you're away from home, you don't have that here to do all of those things. And in that space, it is liberating in one sense. But when you come to the UK, for myself anyway, I can only speak for my own experiences, there's another weight that's put on you. And that weight comes in the form of the kaupapa that are being carried by our Māori living in the UK and overseas. So for example, we had the Oceania exhibition a couple of years ago, and this is not something that's extraordinary. These kaupapa are happening all of the time in the UK and throughout Europe, and it's either collecting kōiwi, which is a kaupapa I was part of, karakia, hiki karakia, to open exhibitions. People want you to come into a pōhiri, or to have a look at taonga that have turned up, you know. These taonga turn up and you sit there and actually you have the same questions that you ask of yourself. You know, at home, you could turn straight to one of your kaumātua or somebody and go, hey, anei te kaupapa, how do we do this? And they will go, we've got this, boy, or come and join us and we'll do this. But actually you come back and you're in the UK and you quickly realize, oh, heka, this is a big kaupapa. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, and you've got to balance, do we do this kaupapa because it's so taumaha, you know, and you end up taking the hit on that, or do you sit there and go, let the kaupapa land, and then there's no one there with whakapapa Māori or toto Māori to connect back to that taonga, to that kaupapa, to those things. So you're in a bit of a rock and a hard place when you're in these positions. And the question that I always keep asking myself is, how do we make sure that we keep ourselves safe? A wairua nei, a whakaaro nei, a kaupapa nei. And those are the things for me that continued being in the UK and being on that side of the world, because, you know, those kaupapa aren't easy kaupapa. They are very heavy kaupapa. And because of the weight of those taonga, you know, as you said, Joe, those taonga are, you know, pre-1800s sometime. And when we're talking about kōiwi and different things like that, you know, we are talking about tapu and noa, and very big tapu and noa. And so, you know, I sit there and ask myself, do I have the capacity to do this or the capability? And if I answer no, then I'm on the phone ringing people at home saying, how can we do this in a way that is safe, that keeps us safe, that keeps the kaupapa safe? And if we can't, then sometimes you have to make that decision where you just can't be part of it. And it's actually quite heart-wrenching, because you know that the kaupapa is really important, and you might be the first of all of your, you know, you might be the first person to be seeing these taonga or being part of this kaupapa for over 100 years. And because we live in the UK, it's much more convenient to get somebody in the UK to come and do this. And people have a wider perspective, thinking, oh, look, just grab any old Māori and they'll be able to come and do this. We'll have a mihi, we'll have a waiata, you know, we'll do these things, and it's all kei te pai. But actually it's not. And so for me, I think about that stuff a lot, and I still think about that stuff even now, being at home and thinking, you know, if I head back to the UK, I have to make sure that I know, or I'm learning enough and making sure I've got the support networks to be able to support that type of mahi, even though sometimes you don't want to do it because you get the bash. Oh, wairua nei. So that's just my little add to the conversation.
Just on what David's saying about the taonga and stuff, that's where we can use principles of Te Tiriti or Waitangi to help us. And when we were working and as we were building our international networks, and for us it was about the protection of matauranga, around the Pacific, but always trying hard to find the source community for, or the iwi or the hapu that belonged to that taonga, in order to make sure that that connection was there immediately, and not walking into those spaces without considering tino rangatiratanga, that the tipuna or the taonga had self-sovereignty in any case, and that they needed to belong, and the relationship with them needed to belong to that source community. That kāwanatanga, from a perspective of using the institutions in the they own it, but they don't own it, another conversation, but not even facilitating those relationships, but telling them, these are the things we will do, these are the things we won't do, this is where the relationship is, this is where our knowledge lies, and they are the owners of that knowledge, not you. So like protecting our matauranga to the nth degree, you know, like not giving them information until you've checked with all of the people behind you, with the whakapapa of it, with the source communities, before you even start saying anything. Again, in protecting ourselves and each other. And then Kaitiakitanga, the shifting the relationship between the institution and the community, so that the community then becomes the kaitiaki of those taonga, not the institution. So like that's where we get that decolonising effect. They don't have half the skills that they need to have in order to look after or to have a healthy relationship with our tipuna and our taonga. So how do we shift it into a space where our communities are connected to the source communities, and then that's where the information starts dropping and connecting back over the world, around the world. And we did that with the Rapa Nui, with the guys in Australia, and then just building those relationships as well. There's, like David said, it's a huge responsibility, and it's very, very tough to take some of these things on, and lots of people are quite emotional in the way that they can facilitate or won't facilitate those spaces. But always protecting our matauranga. Tino rangatiratanga is at the centre of everything that we do. We we know it's in our tikanga. We already been told what to do and how to react to these situations. So yeah, I'm very passionate that our taonga has a lot of power and a lot of responsibility in this conversation around Te Tiriti or Waitangi, because it is something that is outside our political and our historical reactions to it. So we can work with it and look at relationships that can help change our how we stand in the UK and how we protect each other, and also acknowledge our rangatira and our tohunga, because that's where the real knowledge and the real understanding of this the taonga exists.
Hey, Joe, I just wanted to pick up on one small thing, and it was your, you spoke about Kaitiakitanga, and I think that kupu, or that idea, sits within this whole conversation, whether it's about the treaty, whether it's about who we are as Māori in the UK. And when I talk about Kaitiakitanga, I talk about a rights and obligations nexus. And so for me, we sit there, and it could be whether it's going to get kaimoana or anything like that. We say, oh, I have this right, and I hate putting it as a rights obligation, but we say, oh, I've got this right. I'm Māori, I can come and do this, I can come and do that. That's one part. But on the other side, we actually have an obligation to maintain, to protect, to enhance all of this that we are. So when we're in the UK and we're doing these things, yes, we can go out and we can go and be Māori and all of that, but then there's that obligation that sits within us to ensure that kei te tika, kei te pono ngā mahi.
Kia ora. I'm just mindful of time, and I wanted to ask you guys a question. So the question is, how can non-Māori support and appreciate without appropriating or profiting from the culture? How would you define cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation? Roimata?
Yeah, I unmuted, so good job. That's such a good question. And I think I think that people are struggling with that both in Aotearoa and in the UK. For me, the line between appropriation and appreciation is actually very thin, but there are some things that you can do to make sure that you're on the right side of the line. The first thing for me, I think there are three things. The first thing is to look internally at your organization. Let's just say, for example, it's a corporate, because that seems to be the trend these days, is to use Māori words and concepts in products or services or marketing materials of some kind. Is to look internally and say, why do we want to use this? You know, do we even understand what we're using? Is there a reason why we're wanting to tap into the Māori culture? Or is it just because we think it looks good? And if it's about optics, then you're on the wrong side of the line. The second question, I think, is to look at your operation, because there is a way that you can use, and when I say use, I mean incorporate. I don't mean use like a use it and then ditch it, but there's a way that you can incorporate Māori words and concepts in a way that's very authentic. And I think, and also it kind of touches, it's kind of builds on what you said, David, about Kaitiakitanga being about give and take. It's the same thing. So if you're wanting to use aspects of our culture, then you need to look at your operations and really analyze, what are we doing to improve outcomes for Māori? What are we doing to contribute to Te Ao Māori? What does our employee base look like, for example? Are we employing any Māori? Do we have any Māori on the leadership team? What's the cultural capability like within our leadership team or our wider organization? And if the answer to all of those questions is, yes, we employ Māori, but they're all in the factory. No, we don't have any Māori on the leadership team. No, none of our leadership team can say kia ora properly. Then I think you're on the wrong side of the line. And the third aspect is just about being genuine, I think. It's about taking a step back and thinking about, it's kind of, it's similar to my first point, but it's different in that you really have to appreciate that these things mean something to us. So when you look at a, you know, ko whaiwhai or a kōrero or a design that you think is just a pretty motive, there's a whakapapa behind that. And that is that's important to different, you know, different hapu and iwi have different designs that are important to them. So you have to confront that. It's not, you know, none of us have moko kauai on this call, but if we did, you would see what a design actually means because it's etched into someone's skin. And so I think there needs to be an understanding that we are not just talking about words and designs. We're talking about something that means a lot to a culture, and to really think about if you even want to play in that space.
David?
Yeah, I picked up on, I tautoko everything you've said, Roimata, especially if you're thinking about or you've jumped into this space. You know, I talk about cultural capital in the sense that we as Māori have this vast array of knowledge, and it's a knowledge base that's come from generations and generations and generations of us. It's not just something that I've just picked up today. It's something that's been ingrained through these generational, this generational knowledge. And I tautoko what you're saying, Roimata, because what I'm seeing is that, you know, when a society or someone sees an inherent value in something, then everyone decides that's the new flavour of the month. And we see that with Māori culture. Māori culture becomes the so-called flavour of the month, and everyone wants to do either a Māori word or a haka or a waiata and all of these things. And it's great because we see that there's exposure of our culture. But when it's done in a way where it's not respectful, then and the inherent value of it changes, because it changes to something of a corporate rather than something that comes from a whole value system, which is our tikanga and kawa. And so I keep thinking about yoga for some reason. You know, that has its space in its own deep culture. And now it's just this commercialized thing that many people are now yoga experts teaching yoga. I'd hate for our culture to get to that point, because the authenticity of what we bring comes from the ground. Mai te whenua ki te rangi, mai te rangi ki te whenua, ko tātou tēnei. And so people can appreciate the culture without appropriating it. You know, you can mihi to people, you can learn the reo, you can learn aspects without appropriating it. You can acknowledge who your teachers were. You can acknowledge those people from which your knowledge has come from. These are just real simple ways of doing that, but it also comes back to that Kaitiakitanga aspect. You know, if you are going to go into that space and use it, what is your obligation to support, to tautoko the culture? How do we build it on the other side? And that only comes from understanding the historic grievances, the historic narratives of our people. Because I see, even from a generational perspective, we have some of our older generation who were hit for speaking te reo Māori, who never grew up with our language, who never grew up in those spaces. And what I'm seeing is a generational shift where we have one generation who's coming from a deficit space because they haven't had it. And so they hold on to as much as they can. And then you've got the younger generation like us who were very fortunate to be given everything. And we're like, anei ngā kōrero, and we're sharing. And so you've got this balance, but understanding that history before even engaging in that space, whether it's commercial or not, is the starting space. And I saw a quick question there about how can you celebrate Waitangi Day or your first time overseas? You know, it might be as simple as learning how to say kia ora. Here in Aotearoa, they're doing mihi mihi at the moment. Have a look at the social media pages for Te Reo Māori. They have things like tell us your mihi mihi, which is kia ora, ko David Jones ahau, no Aotearoa, no Tūranga nui a Kiwa, no Taupo oku tipuna. So my ancestors are from Taupo, from Gisborne, and ka noho au ki Tūranga nui a Kiwa. I live in Tūranga nui a Kiwa, Gisborne. So, you know, something as simple as that could be something, one way to acknowledge who you are and the country in which the treaty comes from. So, you know, it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be hard to appreciate.
I'm mindful of a couple of minutes left, and I want to give it to Jo to see if she had anything to add to that question before we close off.
I'll try and be as quick as possible, but I think from a cultural appreciation perspective, it's, we'll band around this word, but actually consultation takes years. It's a relationship. It's a building of a relationship and a building of an understanding between whoever you're creating that relationship with and whatever that organisation is. You can't pretend that you are going to culturally appreciate us by going into a relationship and doing this immediately. Get some help. Like, educate yourself, read documents, have discussions. Consultation means asking difficult questions and then giving someone else the time to figure out how they feel about it, what they think the best outcome for it would be, and then working together to get somewhere with it. In regards to Ngāti Ranana, I hardly ever, in the whole time that I was in the UK, saw any sort of collaboration between New Zealand organisations and Ngāti Ranana. There is some incredibly powerful, knowledgeable, interesting, many things inside that rōpū, and the New Zealand community missed it completely by just assuming that Ngāti Ranana would turn up and do what they were doing. They did it because they love their culture. We love our culture. It's like in the center of our bodies. Makes my blood boil, sorry. But it's our blood, you know? Right, so in the future, when you are working with Ngāti Ranana, I really hope that people will collaborate and consult on what something might look like, because it will be spectacular. It won't be, the knowledge and all of that stuff, etc. So cultural appreciation is about stepping back, maybe not asking questions, but observing and thinking about important things like language, culture, environment and protections, and cultural appropriation. I don't know,
that's another seminar, Joe.
yeah, absolutely.
But we are at a time, and I just wanted to say thank you very much to the panelists. It's been really enlightening and really relatable, and I don't think I'll forget the term dusty old woman, Roimata. And also I want to say, Joe, I didn't realise you were from Ngāti Porou, because then that makes this an entirely East Coast sort of flavour.
Yeah.
So, which leads me on to my other point, to anyone who is watching, if you have a kaupapa you want to discuss, it's always important to get different views, so let me know. But thank you again for watching. I hope those in New Zealand, you enjoy the rest of your day, go out in the sunshine, touch another human being. Those of us in the UK are like mole people, we're stuck inside, it's the middle of winter, we don't know how to talk to people yet. So thank you again. Thank you, Catherine, oops, my tōkana, for facilitating, because that meant I could sit back and actually listen and watch. David, could you close us out, please?
Ka pai, e mihi ana ki a koe Claire, o tira Catherine, kai aku tuahine Roimata Joe, ka mihi kia kōrua, o tira kia koutou e mātakitaki ana, māku tō tātou kare kia whakamutunga. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou are ki e ihu kreiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhi ngā tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, amine. Kia ora tātou.
Amine. Kia ora everyone, and thank you. Ka kite.
Ka kite.